It's weird to have a meeting where we're already a minute earlier, so, but we will wait till 1:30 just to make sure any members of the community who are joining us online. Very strange for us to be early. All right, it is 1:30, so I'm going to call us to order and have the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee get underway for January 6th, 2022. I don't think I'll remember to write that into my numbers. We will start with a roll call, so I will ask Mr. Westerson to do a roll call, please.
Excellent, thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Middleton Hope.
Present.
Palladino.
Present.
Parker. Here. Councillor Croson.
Here.
Also with us, we have Councillor Schmidt-Rempel, and I see Councillor Carlson, I believe, was online, as is Councillor Campbell, and a few members of administration as well.
All right, so we are going to jump right into it with the acknowledgement statement. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Now, having done that, we have before us the agenda. Unless there are any concerns with the agenda, we will adopt it by consensus. Nobody's jumping up and down. We also have before us the consent agenda, and the only thing on the consent agenda is the minutes of the December 2nd, 2021 meeting. As well, unless anybody expressed concerns with the minutes, we will adopt those by consensus as well. Excellent. So we jump now into our presentation on the CityLink network redesign. So our agenda will be the presentation by Mr. Sanderson, and then questions from any members of the committee and members of council who have joined us, and any members of the public who have questions as well. So Mr. Sanderson, the floor is yours.
Again, Tim Sanderson, I'm the General Manager of Lethbridge Transit, and very happy to be here and talking about CityLink. Also, for the question period, I also have two of my co-workers, Dara Fadei and Jeff Gillette, who are both oracles. They're both online, so that if we have any questions, I've got the entire brain trust here in order to answer them for everybody. So. Thank you very much. I've got a very brief presentation, probably about 5 or 6 minutes here, just to really go over some of the highlights. But again, I am at your disposal to answer questions all afternoon if need be. So thank you. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of a walk down memory road about how did we get here with CityLink. CityLink is a result of direction given to us by City Council, done on September 8th, 2020. Basically what that resolution directed Lethbridge Transit to do was to restructure the fixed route system in order to implement demand response service, which is basically what we did. Along with that, we were to achieve projected annual savings of $350,000. Next slide, please. So with that, and in that meeting and the subsequent meetings, we did talk about the anticipated impact. We did talk about the disruptive impact that was anticipated, and the slide, the inset slide there, does talk about some of those anticipated impacts and some of the opportunities as well. We saw this as an opportunity to significantly decrease travel times and improve access to transit across the community, especially in areas that did not previously have transit service. To shorten trip times and to reduce the overall operational cost of transit. An auxiliary one was reducing the impact of large side buses on narrow city streets, which when I started here a little over a year ago was a major concern. The negative impacts that we anticipated, or some of the risks, was again changing all of our customers' trip patterns. This would be very similar for a transit user as for people that use their own cars to wake up one day and to see that all the streets had moved and that they had to navigate their way to work based upon that new network. Every single one of our transit customers was affected with this change. The distance to the bus stop may increase. By increasing frequency, by making more direct routing, what that means is that the distance to walk to a bus stop is going to increase. In doing that, we still try to keep it to an average of about 5 to 7 minute walk. Some customers may experience longer wait times when transferring, again, because we wouldn't be doing the centralized transit. Again, we anticipated new app and operational technology challenges, potential disruptions. We are very happy that we really didn't have any technical issues with it. The software did actually perform very well. And then other issues that would service. Again, this was some of the precursor for us when we were initially outlining CityLink. Next slide, please. Some of the key dates, and the formatting on this got messed up a little bit in transition. But again, the beginning of our engagement period, as part of this, we started a very robust engagement process. We met with a number of stakeholders and we held a number of different sessions across the community. We started that engagement process, and this is a very compressed time frame that we did all of this in. Beginning in May, that lasted until mid-June. We brought the entire network with changes that came as a result of the engagement in the middle of June. Began our outreach for and communication of the changes at the end of July. First day of service at the end of August, and then the first day of university. Our first quarterly service improvement occurred on November 16th. All of the statistics that we're going to be sharing with you are of that date, and that's just really, we had to have this report in a month ahead of time, and so everything's a little bit later. That being said, I've got the Brain Trust on hold. If we have questions for stuff that's happened since that time, we can access it right away. Next slide, please. This is a small slide, but this shows a little bit of the customer feedback that we received. Now, we received, for all of the comments that we received, and there was well over 400 of them that came in after, during the implementation of CityLink and subsequently, each one of them, if we were giving contact information, we actually contacted back and had a discussion with them. And as you can see, in July, very little comments. In August, once we started the outreach, our comments went up. They continued through September as the system was implemented, and then into October we dropped off, and then they've dropped off even more in November, and even less in December. A lot of the ones we have now are back to really more of the general concerns that we get for transit about missing buses and different things like that, which we would have had previously as well. Next slide, please. This shows really where the 438 comments that we received were located. The most of them were people concerned with changes to the fixed route, which makes sense. That's 92% of our ridership uses the fixed route. Obviously, they're the ones that are going to be the most concerned. Second to that were just general concerns. A lot of them where we couldn't pick out exactly what the issue was, but they were concerned with with just the idea of change. Which again is understandable. All of the people that used Lethbridge Transit before this change used it because it worked for them in some form or fashion, and they didn't ask for this change. And then the third category was demand response zone. We had less of the curious, misunderstanding, and supportive concerns, which again is to be expected with a change of this magnitude. Next slide, please. So going on to some of the metrics that we've seen since the beginning of CityLink, and I'm very, very pleased to report that all of the metrics that we look at and all the metrics that we were looking to impact positively have been and really have exceeded a lot of the expectations that we've had. On-time performance is a very good example of that. The bar at the bottom shows our previous on-time performance, which was 69%. That's before CityLink started. Of that, 25% of our lack of on-time performance was buses running early. Now, in transit, early is way worse than late, right? Because when a bus is late, you still catch the bus. When a bus is early, you miss the bus. A lot of the complaints, I shouldn't say a lot of the complaints, but some of the complaints that we get in about people missing buses or the bus being very late, that they've missed the connection, isn't a result of the bus running late. It's a result of the bus actually running early or leaving early. Because if you leave early, then the person's just not going to catch the bus. At least if it's late, they're going to catch it. So as you can see, we've seen it's about a 25% improvement in our on-time performance. Next slide. Sorry, if I could just go back to on-time performance. Just one other point that I really want to make on this. We continue to improve on this. We've started an on-time performance task force because the two most important things in transit are speed and reliability, right? We're not happy with where we are with on-time performance. Our target is to have somewhere around 85%. We've got a task force. We're constantly making improvements to it. And that's both behavioral improvements with our transit operators and scheduling improvements on our backside. Next slide, please. The second metric that we take a look at is the transfer rate. We take a look at the transfer rate because that directly correlates to the speed of service. Transfers slow down your trip. Having to transfer requires you to get off of one bus and then get onto another bus, and there's a dwell time in between there that automatically adds to the length of time of your trip. So what our goal with CityLink was to eliminate those transfers to the greatest extent possible, to provide one-seat trips from most common destinations to most common origins. And we've done that in a lot of cases. As you can see, pre-CityLink, our transfer rate was around 38%. Our transfer rate now is somewhere around 27%. So again, that's a 25% reduction in transfer rate. And for those people, that's a significantly quicker trip than they have. Next slide, please. Ridership is the holy grail of transit, right? Whatever we build, we want to build it for as many people as possible to use it. And as you can see from this graph, the yellow bar is our pre-CityLink average for weekday average, which 5084 was our average from 2021. And as you can see, we've greatly exceeded that. I believe the percentage is somewhere around 67% improvement over the rest of 2021. Now, a little bit of that is as a result, of course, or I shouldn't say a little bit, a lot of that is as a result of university coming online, which wasn't present for the rest of 2021. But even when compared on non-school days or non-school weeks or when school's out, we're still seeing somewhere an average of about a 15 to 20% increase, which we feel comfortable to say that all else said and done, if we model it, we're looking at potentially about a 15 to 20% increase in ridership, which is still very, very good. It doesn't sound as good as 67%, but it's probably a little more realistic. Next slide, please. So the other holy grail, ridership is one thing, but efficiency is the other. How well do we spend tax dollars on providing transit service? And how we measure that is our customers per revenue hour. So this is for every hour, for every bus hour that runs, for every bus that runs, how many passengers on average does it carry, right? So it isn't hours of the day or anything, it's actual service hours. So our previous average under pre-CityLink was 7 passengers per hour. That's not good. Really what a pre-COVID, before COVID, what a transit system really wants to achieve is somewhere between 20 and 25 passengers per hour. That's the industry standard for that level of efficiency. 7 is very low. Of course, a number of factors to that, especially related to COVID. But even pre-COVID, we were somewhere around 17 to 18 passengers per hour, so still lower than that industry standard. What we found is that with CityLink, that average is approaching 15 passengers per hour, which is, as I stated to the previous council, is really that short-term 1-year goal that we were striving to achieve, that we would say, hey, this is a success if we can reach 15 passengers per hour within 1 year. We've been able to reach 15 passengers per hour within 3 months. Next slide, please. So some of the next steps, again, we've attached a report that has a lot more statistics, a lot more metrics in it. But again, I'd like to get to the questions a little bit more, but here's some of the next steps that we have. First off is quarterly service improvements. We've already done one in November. We've got another one scheduled for next Wednesday where we're making adjustments to our routes 2 and 3 to address on-time performance. We're making adjustments to our Route 5, our CityLink Purple, to adjust connectivity issues. And we're making adjustments to Demand Zone 103, which is in Lakeview, in order, and all of these are really in response to feedback that we received from our customers. Those modifications in order to make that demand zone work easier, work better for the customers that are in those areas. Those are all coming online in next week, and then we'll have more changes in March, and then we'll have more changes in May, should this continue. Construction of passenger amenities, a lot of the concerns that we see are because of a lack of passenger amenities. This is something, again, that was anticipated in the CIP. In the past CIP, we've had, I don't remember the exact number, but it's a $2 point something million in order to construct passenger amenities at these CityLink hubs. These are desperately needed for our customers. It's just really a matter of time for us to really get shovels in the ground and start constructing them. Waiting out, I'm a transit user. I use transit all the time. A day like today when I've taken the bus, and it's pretty cold waiting out there, especially if you're waiting for a transfer. So this is something that's desperately needed. The good thing is we've really focused a lot of these transfer connections in different areas. We know where those resources need to go. Transition to smaller vehicles for demand response zones. Currently, we're using our Access-a-Ride vehicles. They're, I think, 27-foot cutaways, low-floor vehicles, really designed for Access-a-Ride service. We're looking at actually using a smaller van conversion type vehicle for this, just way more maneuverable, just a much lighter footprint for those residential areas where the demand zones are running. We are actually, regardless of whether or not those are also both usable for demand response zones or Access-a-Ride as well. We think a mixed fleet probably makes sense. Development of guidance documents. This is something that I'm going to be coming back to council with in the next few months, really to provide us some service standards for what should our targets be. Again, we've put our target at passengers per hour of 15 passengers per hour within 1 year. Our long-term target is 25 passengers per hour, but that's not codified anywhere. So again, we'd like to come to council and talk about what those service standards should be. What kind of ridership should we be looking at before we start taking a look at a shelter? What indicators does a neighborhood have to have in order to either reduce or expand transit service in them? There's a number of different ways to do it, and that's something that we're going to be coming with you in the next few months. And then different engagement triggers. So when we make a change in transit, at what level of change do we go out to the public in order to get their feedback on? We've got a pretty good idea of where it is, but we'd like to get some council guidance and just really codify what those ideas are. And then the final thing is the potential expansion of time of travel to Access-a-Ride customers. And that probably sounds a little Greek, and I'll try to explain it. Right now, we offer 2 services on demand response. One is Access-a-Ride, which is available to persons with disability whose disability prevents them from accessing the fixed route service. And then we have the demand zones that are part of the CityLink strategy. For Access-a-Ride, in order for a person to book it, they have to book their trip multiple days in advance in order to be secured a spot. So I always use the example, if somebody decides that they want to get their hair done or they want to go to a movie, they have to decide that they want to do that probably a week in advance in order to secure that level of space. Whereas in the demand zone, they call it time of travel. They pick up the phone and say, hey, I want to go now, and then that vehicle shows up within 20 minutes. With the demand zone, the way that we have it structured under CityLink, we feel that it's well within our capabilities to provide that level of demand zone service to our Access-a-Ride customers as well. So that's one of the next targets that we're working on and one of the longer term goals in order to do it. The best thing is we also think that it's a wiser use of resources. We are going to see, I'm sure, I don't want to necessarily foreshadow too much, but as our population ages, we're going to see growth in Access-a-Ride regardless. But we think that this is a much more efficient way in order for us to handle that upcoming growth. Next slide, please. So our recommendation, we did provide 3 different options in the report. Our recommendation and the recommendation of the transit leadership team that the CityLink network redesign becomes permanent with quarterly adjustments being made to reflect feedback, changing travel patterns, and metric indicators, as we've been doing again for the last 5 months, as we will continue to do. We do offer, next slide please, sorry. We do offer two possible alternatives. The one is, and this again is a little bit of foreshadowing, but it is also something that we think would be viable, would be to restore the budget, the $352,000 that we removed from our budget in doing CityLink. We feel that that can do an awful lot of good, and that we can actually take that money and reflect it in increased ridership for the system. And then the second option is to return to the previous system. We don't recommend that for a number of reasons. The first one is the impact that it's going to have on the new ridership that we have just gained. When I started here over a year ago and the whole CityLink thing started coming, I did give frequent warnings to say this is going to adversely impact a lot of our customers. I'm here telling you today that if we go back to the old system, we are going to adversely impact a number of new customers and a number of existing customers that this system works better for. Taking a look at the actual metrics, the system is successful. The system is meeting all of the goals that council set out for us. And what we are concerned about with transit is by going back, rather than potentially investing more resources into transit, all of those gains that we've made will be lost, right? We're going to go back to those 7 to 9 passengers per hour. People have made decisions like they did under the previous system based upon where transit runs, right? They've made decisions about where to work, where to live, where to go, all of those types of things. They've been making those decisions for the last few months, and they're going to continue to make those as we go forward. That doesn't, I don't want to minimize the impact that we've had on some of our longstanding customers, especially those who are transit dependent. That's been a very significant impact. But we can work with those people. We have Access-a-Ride. We have other options. We do make quarterly changes in order to address them. The second reason on the old system is that it is not scalable. There's no way for me, for the way that system's structured with time transfer connections, there's no way to scale it up or scale it down. If you take a look at the Lethbridge Transit Master Plan, their recommendation in improving the transit system has a price tag of $30 million on it. On our budget of $15 million, $15 to $16 million. We, under CityLink, we can scale up improvements and we can reallocate resources from one area to the other in order to meet the changing needs of the community. So, next slide, please. And that's it. We are all prepared for questions.
Microphone is on. Thank you very much for the presentation. We actually have a second presentation as well. So if you want to have a seat, we're going to invite Ms. McKenna up. She has asked to speak to the Standing Policy Committee for 5 minutes. So Ms. McKenna, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. I actually thought I would just be making comments at the end. I didn't realize it falls under the category of presentation.
It can be either
but
way.
I will go with that. That's no problem. So I am speaking in opposition today to the recommendation that's being put before the committee to recommend to council that the redesign become permanent. My initial reason for opposing this is procedural. It's apparent from the report presented to the committee and from my own experience in learning about this report and the recommendation that no meaningful steps have been taken by the transit group to make community members aware that the fact this meeting was happening today and that this report and recommendation would be submitted. I learned about the meeting entirely by chance late yesterday evening from one of your colleagues, which is what led me to come here today. One of the other things that's clear from the report is that once this new transit system was put into place, numerous, as in hundreds, of complaints about the new system were received. I think I'm responsible for about at least 4 of them, and those are the ones that are just recorded with the transit office. The general manager in this report seems to suggest that the majority of them will be resolved, have been resolved, or will be with small tweaks. I disagree. What's most concerning here to me is that it's clear from the level of complaints received that I would have thought it would have been incumbent on this transit group to take proactive steps to advise members of the community that this redesign was not in fact permanent, and there'd be an opportunity for people to have their say, to make their concerns heard by this committee or council, and in fact go and solicit feedback from users and members of the community once this redesign was in place. It's quite apparent to me from looking at this report that the group has been entirely reactive. They're waiting for people to phone them up and complain before they think about whether or not to make any changes or look at creating any solutions. I'd also say that as a community member who has called in to state concerns about the system, I certainly have never been asked by anyone, a frontline transit worker, hey, can I take your name and number and I'll make sure someone gets back to talk to you. Now, I don't have a complaint about that as it relates to the frontline worker. When I'm phoning, I usually have an immediate problem that they're trying to help me solve, and they do, within the confines of the system they have in front of them, do their best to help me to solve the problem, and I have appreciated that. But when I have raised concerns about structurally, about why on earth is the city doing this, and is this actually a good idea? No one's ever asked me for my name and number, and certainly no one's ever contacted me. So I just want you to make you aware of that. So it just leads me to wonder, well, how many other members of the community are out there who feel the same way as I do and need to be contacted proactively to be able to have their say? Now, I do want to give you a few views about why I would say, at least for our family, this system is not faster and it's not more accessible, and it's certainly not meeting our needs. Prior to this, I still have two teenage children who use these buses every day during the week. The redesign has made their use of buses longer and harder. And I'll just go through the issues here. So we live in Lakeview. We have a kid who attends university. It takes her an hour to travel from home to the university and the same back during weekdays and during what I would call core operational hours, 9 to 4. There's an alternate route that would require her to take 3 separate buses, and that would also take about an hour. It takes 15 minutes to drive from the university to our home. It's my view that service delivery that takes 3 times as long as it does to drive, it just clearly is unreasonable and fails to meet the needs of the community. With the new system, there's no bus that goes from Mayor McGrath Drive directly to the downtown. To me, that's another unreasonable way to structure the transit system. This is particularly important for those of us who live in Lakeview. Our neighborhood was a target in this redesign. We lost all of our bus routes through our neighborhood. We also happen to live about a 5-minute walk from Mayor McGrath Drive, which means we don't get any access to the demand response zone, which is okay, except then when we arrive at Mayor McGrath Drive, all we can actually do is spend all day driving up Mayor McGrath Drive and down Mayor McGrath Drive on a bus, unless we want to get onto another bus to transfer at 6th Avenue or transfer at Southgate Station. And I just don't see these being reasonable ways of structuring the system. Our other teen attends Winston Churchill High School. There's an IB program there that draws many students from the north side, the south side, and the west side. I frankly have no idea how any parents who live on the west side whose kids go to that IB program manage to get their kids to school every day on the bus. But there used to be a bus from Winston that would go directly downtown. That assisted our teen with his part-time job and attending athletics on the west side. That's now just not possible based on the removal of that route as well. And our only option at this point is to drive. One other thing I wanted to make the committee aware of is the city chose to announce the specifics about its changes to the routes after the university conducted its lottery for parking. So we're aware of a number of other families with kids who opted not to pay for the parking spot that they got at the university in the lottery because it's costly. They thought, well, I'm getting a bus pass with the fees that I'm paying for university, so I'll use that instead. Only to find out that after they refused the parking spot that they were going to be allocated, because you have a very short window to accept it, Then the city announced their changes to the routes, and then they realized, oh, it's going to be completely impractical now to get the bus. So I'd say that was a serious misstep and a serious, really just bad planning. And I see my time is up. I just want to make a couple of other comments with the indulgence of the committee. One of the issues is, I would say, that the demand response zones, I'd question just how useful they really are. You only have two options. Once we found out, we didn't sort of spend a lot more time looking into them once we realized we weren't entitled to have any access to a demand response zone. But you only have two options. You either get you get that bus to somewhere else within the demand response zone, which is a tiny area, or you get to go to one of the other stations to get on another series of buses. We would question whether or not these demand response zones are really particularly useful. The other thing I would say is that when we were initially trying to get to use the demand response zone, when you try to phone early in the morning before 311 is initiated, you go directly to the transit office. Very helpful individual single person there whose job it is to field all the calls. It can at times take 10 to 20 minutes to actually get them to be able to pick up the phone because they're dealing with multiple calls, which is not the way that it is with the 311 system. So that seems to be another operational issue that's there. So to my mind, I think that it is premature and it's concerning to me the recommendation that you have before you. I think that there needs to be more, and I guess one last thing that I would also say, I was sort of surprised and disappointed to see that the savings that all of this disruption and change has put into effect is a mere $350,000. When looking at the broad budget up for transit and the broad budget for the city as well, it's surprising to me that the purported savings are so small, and I guess I really question whether or not, given all of the upheaval and angst that has been caused in people's lives, in using this system is really worth it for that amount of money. So those are the comments I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So we'll now move into questions. Councillor Parker, you have a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and first of all, Happy New Year to my colleagues, to members of administration, and of course the audience. It's hard to believe it's already the 6th. Thank you, Ms. McKenna, for your presentation. Am I correct to say that your father was the late Ian McKenna? That's the one, okay. And I remember him coming forward in regards to I think it was a human rights issue in regards to equality on excessive ride. Am I correct? Back in the day, or handy bus at the time? Yes. And that's appreciate what he did. So I just want to let you be noted that. Mr. Sanderson, council, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself when I say this, and after the changes that were made to transit, and I've stated this to you in person, and during the election time, we heard that in my ears and from the emails that I've gotten since the changes and during election and even post-election, transit still seems to be the #1 issue in regards to the changes. And over the last year, no one has really complained to me about the fees. No one's complained about the drivers. They've all been great. The issue has been, why did you guys change something that was so good? And some of my colleagues will say, and rightfully say, people don't like change, right? And so so you would think over time that people would I guess, you know what, maybe this is not that bad. But I'm continually hearing that they don't like what has occurred here. And these are the people that don't have other options. Like, we're really good at building roads in our city and people like to use their vehicles. And I understand and appreciate the fact in communities such as Calgary, people use transit for two main reasons. Usually it's a lot faster to get from point A to point B because there's so much more traffic in Calgary, and plus parking's close to $50 a day at times, so at least it's not as bad as it used to be. Here it's more of a social service, in that the people that use transit are the people that don't really have access to a vehicle, they don't have access to quick transportation. These are the people that are on AISH, people on fixed income, students. And so we seem to really put their lives upside down with these changes. And I think we as a council, and I speak on this, we probably have to blame on this because we did ask all our business units to go back and find some efficiencies with each department. And as stated in your presentation, we cut $350,000, and there was a $350,000, and there's a consequence to that decision. and I have heard it loud and clear, the consequence of this decision. Do you think we could go back to what it was and then build up from there, working with the ridership? Because I know what you said. You said option 2 is kind of going backwards and it's not being progressive. And I like that mindset because you got to always be progressive. But is it really regressive if we go back to what it was and then build from there, working with stakeholders and investing money back into the system? Is there an opportunity to do that?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Parker. There's a lot to unpack in everything there. Can we go back and can we build from scratch? My credo is when somebody asks us to do something, can we do it? Absolutely. We can do whatever I get directed to do. Is that the best way to do it, or should we do it that way? Again, a lot of those are political decisions, right? What I can do is I can offer my technical expert opinion from a transit perspective. And the challenge with the previous system, and I'm going to really try not to get too much in the weeds, although I love living in them, with this description, but the way that the system was set up previously was a closed network where every route was independent of every other route. And we couldn't just add a bus somewhere. You couldn't add a route because it's not going to meet up with the other vehicles. It's not going to, it would be of limited utility. So if we went back to the old system and you said, Tim, here's $1 million, spend it on the transit system, I'd say, I don't really know where to spend that, right? There's no logical place in order to start, right? Now, I also want to go back maybe a little bit further to say that the old transit system served its purpose very well for the people that used it, right? The people that were using it, right? Those 7 people every hour that got on a bus, okay? The transit system worked really well for them, and that's why they were using it, okay? I can never discount that. It's a fact, and that's the problem with messing with bus routes, is you're going to adversely impact them. The question is, and again, more from a political aspect, are we happy as a city to have a transit system that runs at 7 passengers per hour for the investment that we've made? And what the previous council told me is that they weren't, right? That they wanted to have a transit system that was efficient and was effective and was more meaningful to everybody in the community. When I started here in December, I heard all kinds of complaints about people living on the south side that were going to university, and it was taking them 90 minutes in order to get there, right? Well, we addressed that for the majority of them. Today, you can get on a bus at Superstore, and you can be at the university in 30 minutes, right? You know? Now, again, in some areas, in Lakeview, and I don't want to discount the previous speaker, there are some areas where it is a little more challenging to get from point A to point B. And it's just the shifting. But what we've done is we've created a system where it is a quick system for the majority of transit users and potential transit users in the community. The best thing is we can build on it, right? If we need a bus in Lakewood, if we need a fixed route bus in Lakewood that needs to go to the university, if that's what the market demands, we can just add it, right? $350,000, bang, done. We can add a bus to go from Lakeview straight to the university. We couldn't do that under the old system. We couldn't just add a bus in order to do that, but we can now. We've got a very strong foundation for building in the future. And quite honestly, we tore apart the entire system and rebuilt it from scratch in 6 to 8 months, right? Which was what we were tasked with doing. Did we get it perfect? No. As much as my wife tends to think that I'm always perfect, no. We didn't get it right, but we're building on it, right? And we're getting feedback from our customers, and we're taking a look at the metrics. What we're doing is but the decisions that we're making and where we're adding service, where we're reallocating service, isn't based on solely on feedback. It's also based on metrics and performance and where we're going to get our biggest bang for the buck. And again, that was the direction that council gave us. If council wishes to give us direction that no, we'd like a transit system that provides a mediocre level of service to a small amount of people in the community that need it, we can do that. We can do really whatever direction is given to us. But as a transit professional, that wouldn't be my recommendation.
And my last question for right now, thank you for the answer, Ms. Anderson. The question was regarding the feedback, how you got the feedback, and can you explain how the feedback was retained or how you got that feedback?
Sure. Two pieces of feedback. The first was the engagement feedback, which we've talked a lot about. I don't remember the number offhand, but we received 275 actual comments, right? Thousands of questions, but about 275 comments in the initial engagement.
Was that like a phone call? Was it an email? Or was it actually a system?
It was a mix of everything on the initial engagement. Again, we were under COVID, so there was less face-to-face meetings, but we did do some of those. Most of it was Teams meetings, but some of it was email correspondence and stuff like that. But the vast majority of it was through Teams meetings, through stakeholders. We did not get a lot of public. We didn't get a lot of public engagement with that, but we got a ton of engagement from community stakeholders. That's where the vast majority of it came in. A lot of the stuff coming from the public was questions more than comments.
So the question would be, for example, Mrs. Smith calls up your department, says, I'm really disappointed. This is what someone would call Mrs. Smith back, say, Mrs. Smith, can you please explain what your problem is? Okay, thank you, Ms. Smith. We will get back to you. Is that the kind of stuff that was occurring?
I'm sorry, that was about the engagement stuff. I'll talk a little bit about since we've, our communication piece and our reaction once we've implemented. Since we've implemented, we've gotten feedback from a number of different places. The most common one is escalation from 311, right? A person calls 311, they're asking questions, they're not getting satisfied. The 311 operator isn't in a position to answer the questions that they're asking, and it gets escalated. The vast majority of our concerns come from that. The other more common places that they come from are direct emails to us. We do get comments from bus operators and stuff like that. That's a little bit smaller. And then a lot of them we also get from council or just interested bodies. But the vast majority are escalations from 311.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Palladino.
Thank you, Mr. Sanderson, for this presentation. Full disclosure here, I don't use Lethbridge Transit. I think I stepped off the bus in 19-whatever, long time ago, and I've never been, since I turned 16, how's that? But I do understand the city must provide transit to those that don't own a car or choose not to use a car to go to university or downtown or to work. And being new on council, all of this is new to me too. So I've turned into one of those people that when I see a Lethbridge Transit bus go by now, I count the heads inside, and it's not a pretty picture, at least in my neighborhood, when there's 2 or 4 people in there. And then I look at the 438 complaints over 4 months, and I'm just wondering, my first question is, how does that 100 complaints a month rate to pre-CityLink? And I'll let you answer that, and then I think I have 2 other questions for you.
Sure. Again, 438 complaints, very high compared to what normally we would have. Again, to be expected. Everything changed, right? Everything changed, and the complaints were everything from I don't have a bus anymore, what am I supposed to do, to just really misunderstanding what the system was and concerned about that. So a wide variety, again, to be expected. Normally we'd get 20 a month or something like that. So it's a small number. That being said, getting concerns raised isn't a bad thing, right? It's a good thing because at least if they're sending them to us, then they expect us to do something. So I'm always hesitant to say a lot of concerns is not a bad thing. Also, I'd love to get you back on the bus, and anytime you want to go for a bus ride, I'm more than happy to do that. So.
Right. I might take you up on it. I did take the one from downtown to the university just because my 7-year-old grandson wanted to go for a ride on a bus. He'd never been on a bus, but you did a pretty good job about the concept. How did it come to Lethbridge, and has it been used anywhere else in Canada?
The the demand response
the link
service
system, I guess this new shift.
Sure. So demand response service has been around. I've been in transit for 30 years. It's been around long before me. My dad was in transit. He was responsible for implementing it in Winnipeg back 35 years ago, 40, 50 years ago probably now. So the concept's been around. The difference now is the technology, and it's actually improved. It used to be called Dial-a-Bus or whatever, whatever system, and now we call it Transit on Demand, and you can use an app in order to do it. What's improved is really the algorithm and the computing power that you have, rather than a person writing out the schedule, that we can let the computers do it. So the concept's been around for a very long time. A number of pretty much every transit market of our size or larger in Canada has done it. Same with across North America. Personally, myself, I've implemented it in 3 different places, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Des Moines, Iowa, and Nashville, Tennessee. So, and as a consultant,
Been to Des Moines.
beautiful place.
It is, actually. It reminds me a bit of Alberta. The area does, anyway. My last question, did you consult with drivers' unions at all, the union?
100%. We held multiple sessions with them as far as it goes. In addition to the committees that we have with the union, we held open houses for our operators and had some fairly good participation from them during that period as well. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Middleton Hope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Sanderson, and Ms. McKenna, thank you very much for your presentation as well. It provides some context. I have 3 questions to start. First of all, can you explain perhaps, was there a push from the city, was there a push from city administration to create efficiencies, to look for efficiencies in the organization, and this was the catalyst for our transition from what we had to what we have today? So is it money-driven, or is it services-driven?
Thank you for the question, Councilor Milano. And this is going to go back a little bit before my time, so a lot of this is, I don't want to say it's hearsay, but it's what I know so far. Prior to me getting here last December, there was the KPMG study, which went across the city and identified a number of different opportunities for the city. For transit, there was 3 opportunities that came up, or I think 4 actually. One was discontinuation of school buses. The other one was accessor ride eligibility, and the third one was implementation of demand response services. And council at the time implemented all 3 of those, and that was the push, was that KPMG report. And then when I started here, it was already, the push towards demand response was already underway. I was hired to guide it.
In your expert opinion, because I certainly believe that's what you are, the information that's contained in the KPMG report, is it sound? Does it provide you with good guidance, or is it misguided?
In my expert opinion, I disagree strongly with a number of things in the KPMG report.
Is there anything that you could highlight that might provide me with some more more insights into this whole process that we've gone through?
So the KPM, at least as far as demand response transit goes, KPMG recommended completely eliminating fixed route transit and implementing demand response transit, and came up with a conclusion out of somewhere that would save the city money. And I strongly, adamantly disagree with that.
Thank you. My second question then is, you made a comment, and I guess I'm going to hold you to it. You indicated increased speed. Where? Beyond from the hub downtown to the university, where has speed been increased for our ridership?
System-wide and trip-wide. The biggest indicator, again, all trips are different, right? So one person's trip may be longer, but as a whole, trips are generally shorter. And our indicator for that is that transfer ratio. Without requiring you to change buses, you've got a 1-seat ride in order to get from point A to point B. The average system speed has also increased substantially as a result of it. So it isn't that the buses are traveling faster, they're just dwelling less.
Thank you. And I have just one last question that is kind of double related. And I poked at this the last time that we had discussions, and it's in regards to the shuttered shelters. They're about $20,000 a piece, I'm led to understand. how many of these shelters have we got shuttered across the city that we are no longer using because of changes to the transit system? And what do we intend to do with them?
So a number of the shelters are actually limited cost to the city because they're done by Pattison, and they're used as advertising, so they're revenue generators and they can be reallocated
Are they revenue generators for whom?
for the city.
Okay, so when we shutter a facility, like one of the shelters, then we're losing revenue.
If it's an advertising shelter, but at that point in time, we'd redeploy it, again, at no cost to the city, to a location that, in some cases, it might even generate more revenue. It might be a sold location or whatever. There are other shelters that are shuttered. We're in the process right now of again, we don't want to do too much infrastructure work, again, prior to this meeting, but really replacing those shelters. Shuttered shelters is hard to say. Replacing those shelters in locations that are more appropriate at this point in time.
So we're in the process of doing that, is that correct?
Well, we've been kind of waiting for a little bit of direction on council. We've already spent significant infrastructure dollars to get us to where we are today. But before we start spending a lot more infrastructure dollars, we want to make sure that this is something that we don't want to move them and have to move them back, right?
So do we have any idea, what sense of numbers in terms of how many of these facilities are shuttered or these structures are shuttered?
Oh, I would say maybe a dozen, probably less. I don't have an exact number, but that's my gut feeling on it.
I think you've answered all of my questions for now. Thank you.
I don't see anyone else in the queue, so I'll take my opportunity to ask a few questions. Following up on Councillor Middleton Hope's question, is CityLink, as we have designed it, what KPMG recommended, or is it something that came out of transit?
Thank you for that question. I'm going to try to be very careful, I think, in answering that. It isn't what KPMG recommended. KPMG recommended that we didn't do any fixed route transit, and we went to complete on demand. Again, when I came here, I pushed back against that concept, knowing of the potential damage that would happen. And I think we can see even from the limited demand response that we did, that wasn't a very good way of doing it. So we took a lot of the concepts, I think, or at least some of the spirit, I would say, of what KPMG recommended, and then we mixed that with the directive from council to reduce our budget by $350,000 in order to implement CityLink.
So it is more of a Mead and Lethbridge response than KPMG had in their report.
Mead and Lethbridge, to a certain extent, most of the routings and recommendations are based upon the Lethbridge Transit Master Plan. So it's not just me thinking it up, me and the rest.
No, I'm well aware of that. We have some new members on council who might think it came directly out of KPMG, but it's not. So you explained partly when you talked about post-secondary students about how we are looking at the ridership. So in that respect, you looked at it with days where there's no university, et cetera. We also are in the middle of COVID pandemic where we shut transit down for a while and brought it back. So how do we know if the ridership is actually based on the new system or other factors? Is there any way of knowing that? Because I mean, it's looking like this system is increasing ridership. Is there any way of knowing if it's other factors or if it is based on the system?
The baseline's really tough, right? And we cut the pie in a number of different ways, and again, we live and die by metrics. We stare at them all the time in order to come up with that determination. And coming up with that one brass ring that is, okay, this says it, is very, very difficult. But why we feel confident saying that our ridership is up is by comparing non-school days with other non-school days pre-CityLink, right? And just taking a whole host of them, and really in virtually every model that we run, we don't see any indications of better ridership pre-CityLink as opposed to other ones. Now, that being said, the pandemic kind of changes, people are kind of riding, but the biggest catalyst really is university. The rest of everything, people are still working from home, people's travel patterns have still changed. Yeah, we see a little bit of fluctuations, but a big change in transit for ridership is 2%, right? That's a substantial change in transit ridership. We're talking about changes of 15 to 20% that we're constantly seeing, and that's real. So
So it does seem to be based on the system, the increase in ridership, not just fluctuations in season or something like that.
We've looked at it a million ways, and I can confidently say, and conservatively say, that CityLink has increased our ridership by 10 to 20%.
So in both of your scenarios, option 1 and option 2, you're wanting to have some of the money back that council removed from the system. I don't know any department that doesn't want the money back that council removed from the system. What would be the consequences, A, if the money isn't put back, if we stick to this system but don't put the money back? And what would be the benefits if the money is returned?
Thank you for really giving me that question. And again, I don't want to be I don't want to be a fearmonger or anything like that, and I won't be. If we don't receive an additional budget, we will continue to operate the system as it is, and we'll continue to tweak it. We've got a number of, I think, very exciting tweaks coming up for May in order to make it much better and improve on-time performance and connectivity. We'll continue to do those things, and our mandate is to provide the highest quality transit system for the most amount of people within our budget. We'll continue to do that. That being said, for an additional $350,000, we can make substantial increases to the level of service and substantial increases to the ridership, really through increasing frequency on a number of routes, which reduces travel time.
Thank you. I'm seeing a bunch of people pop into my system. Mr. Fox, do you have an answer or question?
I didn't touch anything, but I'm sorry about that. I believe me and Lisa have been communicating back and forth, and I believe she has some context to add.
Oh, okay. All right. Is that you, Ms.? That must be online then? So, Ms. Trent, is
Yes,
that you? Okay.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, Madam Chair. Yes, I just wanted to share with members of SPC and to the larger audience, just to context the information as it relates to 311, as it falls under my purview, and certainly not to discount any of the issues and concerns raised by Ms. McKenna there in chambers, but I did want to provide council with representative information with respect to Councillor Palladino's question with respect to 311 calls, and I believe it was alluded to by other members of SPC as well. So pre-CityLink, just to context the conversation and ensure you have the right information, we were sitting on average, anywhere between 1 and 3 calls pre-CityLink into 311 with respect to transit, and averaging around 2 calls, and we're talking on a per week basis. We did pop up on the launch of CityLink to around 90 calls, and that began to taper down upon implementation, down to averaging around 30, and then down to around 15, and now we're sitting again in between 1 and 3 calls. So we are now back down in terms of inquiries on transit to where we were pre-CityLink. So I just wanted to make sure that I provided that context to members of SPC to inform the appropriate data and analytics as it relates to 311 calls. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Councillor Campbell, you have a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the presentation, all the information. And I know, Mr. Sanderson, I hear over and over how much work and effort you put into talking to people about their concerns. And of course, we had our previous speaker giving some concerns. I'm just wondering, would you like to address some of those here right now? And just is this sort of typical of how you deal with some of the concerns that a lot of our citizens have?
Thank you for the opportunity, Councillor Campbell. Absolutely. Again, we always strive again to do a very robust engagement process and a very robust outreach process, and I would never say that it is not in need of improvement going forward in order to do that. And the more engagement that we get, the better. The challenge is how to go about doing it and how to get the outreach and everything like that. I'm a transit expert. I'm not necessarily an expert in soliciting feedback and those things, but I know we do work hand in hand with the communications folks at the city in order to try to get as much of that feedback as possible. And I've done a number of different public hearings, again, over my lengthy career in transit. I don't think that I've ever had one where I've received as many comments as we did on the engagement to this one. Receiving actually 270, 280 comments initially And then again, recording and providing the 487, those are a lot of comments. And I think it does indicate that we are not perfect, but we are really doing a good job. And I think the biggest piece that I really want to emphasize is, and I do apologize that I haven't had the opportunity to speak with the previous speaker, but the amount of conversations that our staff has had and that have been escalated from 311 in order to try to find a resolution, or at least understand what the concerns are so that we can build on it for our quarterly service changes.
So I guess success for you often is in the metrics, as in terms of ridership. You see the numbers going up, which is great, but it doesn't necessarily translate into satisfaction with your. Does that come into play when you're making decisions? That there's lots of people that may not be satisfied, although ridership is up. Sort of not really a direct question, but it's sort of a philosophy, I guess.
Well, the actual, at least in transit, the actual measurement of satisfaction is very difficult to do. Again, how do we reach our passengers? And we've talked about a number of different ways in order for us to do that. But satisfaction can be a number of different things. But the core indicator of whether or not somebody is satisfied with the service is retention, right? Are they continuing to use the service? Are they starting to use the service? Are we getting new people in order to use the service? And at the end of the day, it comes back to ridership as far as that goes. Now, do we take a look at the metrics? Do we take a look at all the comments that come in order to do that? Yes. I think that at least what I would like to do after the system settles in, a year down the road, it takes a year, 2 years for transit systems to actually, especially a change like this, to actually get their firm grounding down. To at that point in time, do a satisfaction survey, like a real robust, statistically relevant survey, in order to see where we stand. I think would be valuable.
Great, and I'm sure it's safe to say you will have a chat with our previous speaker at some point.
As soon as we're done.
Great, thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may also augment Mr. Sanderson's response to Councillor Campbell with some additional comment.
Oh, please go ahead.
With respect to go forward strategy in terms of utilization and leveraging of 311 and its customer relationship management system, we are looking to integrate some heat map and provide some direct information to members of the transit team, to provide them with appropriate context of where the hot issues are and what they are, and supporting them with tracking that through our CRM system. So in terms of your inquiry on customer satisfaction, I think we can certainly support that vis-a-vis 311 and the customer relationship management system and some of the heat mapping that we're able to do to support them.
Thank you. Councillor Carlson. Oh, sorry, Councillor Campbell, are you finished with your questions? Oh, he just.
Yes, Anne. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Chair Croson, and thanks for letting us attend the meeting. Through you to Mr. Sanderson, if I can, and thanks, Mr. Sanderson, for the information and presentation. And please forgive me if I'm plowing old ground. I did have to sneak away for a couple minutes. You did allude to some, I think you called them exciting changes coming up in May. And perhaps you even answered in some of your presentations some of the concerns of the other speaker. When I look at the transit map, and I'll be honest, I am a occasional transit user, and I'm one of the ones that gets places much faster, so it works for me. But when I look at the transit map, I do see a big gap in Lakeview. And are the upcoming changes, or is there anything you can give us any comfort that Lakeview will not be ignored and will have similar levels of service?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Carlson, through you, Councillor Croson. We've actually got changes to Lakeview coming up on Wednesday to the demand zone. Now Lakeview is a. We did have a number of discussions about Lakeview when we were designing the system. It did not have. The ridership was not present there enough to really warrant a fixed route. But there are pockets of ridership in that area. And there's pockets of those that are transit dependent in that area as well. So that's why we put a demand zone in there. One of the overwhelming concerns that we've heard from people using the demand zone, which actually is turned out to be fairly popular and fairly well received, I think, after the initial shock to the system, was that they don't like the idea of having to go to Superstore and the CityLink hub up by Superstore in order to transfer if they're going to another location. And the reason why we focus and funnel all of these into these locations is really that's the way that we can do it efficiently. That's how we can do it with one vehicle rather than having multiple vehicles coming around, is by funneling. But what we found is that people want more options. So what we are adding come Wednesday is we're adding a second hub over by the exhibition grounds, which will allow people to transfer to the Route 4 Orange, which will allow them that quick, it's a 6-minute ride to downtown from that location. So starting Wednesday, they can book to either go anywhere in the zone, to Superstore, or to the exhibition grounds. So we think that will be a big change. The other discussion, we've had multiple discussions about this, is the idea of switching the demand zone and taking those resources and making it a fixed route again. The challenge that we have is the ridership that we have is all over the area, and there's no efficient way for us to run a fixed route through all those streets. And I don't want to diss previous developers, but it is an awful neighborhood for street connectivity. I mean, there is no way to there's no way to run an efficient bus route through that area, and that really limits our ability to run a fixed route bus. And I would also like to add that the existing fixed route bus didn't get very much ridership. It ran, I think it was 4 or 5 passengers every hour driving down it. As Councillor Palladino said, it would have been one of those 40-foot buses rumbling along a residential street without many people on it. So we'll continue to make these changes to it. At least that's our perspective in order to see. And then at some point in time, if ridership continues to increase, it may become viable to put a fixed route in there when we get to the point where we can't do it with demand response.
Thank you for that. I do understand the challenges of Lakeview. I'm a Lakeview boy. I was the paper boy for most of Lakeview, so I know all those weird, windy, curvy, linear streets very, very well. So I do understand the challenges. Thank you. My final question, Chair Crowson, and maybe you discussed this again, Tim. I had to sneak away. The ridership increases and the numbers. We're comparing apples and oranges and bananas a lot. Have we compared to pre-COVID numbers? And do we know what those are? Because when you compare the numbers a year ago, we were all in lockdown. Most of transit wasn't even running at some points. So I'm just curious if we've wound back a few extra years and done some comparators.
So most of the comparisons that I give are to 2021 numbers pre CityLink and after CityLink. 2020 is it's a gong show, and from week to week there's just, because we're locked down, we weren't locked down. 2021 has been fairly static, so that's what we're using as our comparator point for it. When taking a look at 2019, our ridership is still down. We're down probably about 30%, which is industry-wide what we're looking at. But here's the big difference is that our efficiency is approaching the same levels that we were at. At 15 passengers per hour, we were around 17 passengers per hour in 2019. We're approaching 15 passengers per hour, which is really what our metric is. We know that people are still working from home, right? We're not going to get a lot of the ridership back until we get completely back to normal, and even then it's going to be different, right? But what we can do is the resources that we have in the street, we can utilize them to the fullest potential possible. And by getting up to that 15 to 18 passengers per hour, that's exactly what we're doing. And we've gone from 7 passengers per hour to 15 passengers per hour, which is really the big improvement.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else in the queue. I have a procedural question. One of the first questions Ms. McKenna had for us about this coming up January 6th. It was posted a week ago on the agenda. Well, we probably looked at it, the general public probably didn't. We are operating under this system right now. This is to, the suggestion here is to make this permanent. And I don't know if you can answer this or if Mr. Brierly. If we sort of recess this and had another discussion on it a month from now, would this upset the schedule, or would it just continue as it is to allow more public engagement? Is it an issue that this has to go to council on the next agenda, or can it wait for a bit more discussion with the public? I don't know if it's you or Mr. Brierly or Mr. Fox.
From a transit aspect, yes, we can defer. We can do whatever you want, but there are impacts to it. The original direction was a 6-month pilot project that would end in March. If we want to end it in March, this is, it's going to be tight to even do it if a decision were made today. Pushing it back is going to simply just push back the length of time that it will take for us to unravel. But the bigger issue that's going to happen is the longer that we spend, I don't want to sound pejorative, but kicking the can down the road, people are making decisions based upon where to live, where to work, where to do it based upon this transit system. And the potential impact of switching back, although it's going to be significant today, is going to be even more significant should we do that.
Fox, you have something to add?
Through the chair, I don't see any issue with postponing it for a month to receive more public input and make sure that council is well informed on the public's point of view on this. And you are aware of some of the issues that that Mr. Sanderson has outlined, but I don't see any too big of an issue if we postponed it for a month.
Okay. My question got a bunch more reaction. Councillor Parker.
Thank you very much. And so, I don't know if this would be a good idea. So if we're going to do something like that, could we put like a little notice on each bus that council is going to be having a presentation and we'd like to know your feedback, because you're going right to the users on the bus saying on this date, send your emails, do all this, is the bus service serving you well and all that, and put it as like a little advertisement right when they get on the bus and when they get off the bus. I just think sometimes the simple ideas like that, because those are the people that are actually using the bus, and I think that would be a suggestion I would bring forward. Could you do something like that?
I hate to keep on repeating myself, Councillor Pryor. We can do anything you want, but absolutely.
And I can't imagine it being very costly, and it just, you're right there talking to the user. So that would be a recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Middleton-Hope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have, as you have alluded to, we have received quite a number of complaints in regards to service and service levels. What does success look like? No complaints? 80% reduction in complaints? Do you have, because you're a man that talks about metrics. Well, let's hear the metrics. What does that look like?
No complaints means that we're not being responsive, right? If people are using our services and they have, and we're receiving no feedback, they're frustrated with it and they're not sending it back. So there's a healthy number of complaints, concerns, feedback.
Well, feedback versus complaints, let's be very clear about the distinction.
Well, it's difficult to categorize that because sometimes a complaint isn't necessarily, we have to take a look at all of them, right? Sometimes a complaint, just like we used to categorize complaints as valid or not valid, a complaint is always valid, right? Because it is, we're not meeting somebody's expectations. So if we take a look at not meeting people's expectations for it, is there a metric for that? We don't have a baseline at this point in time, so it's really hard for me to say what that should be. But what generally gets used is the number of feedbacks that you get, the number of concerns, complaints, whatever you want to call them, per 100,000 customers. We haven't taken a look at that metric, but it's but it is a way of doing it. The challenge that I always have with that, though, is that by trying to lower the amount of complaints that we get, unfairly allows us to put into systems to not want to receive the complaints, right? We want to put in all the structures possible. For example, putting up signs on the bus that say, how do you contact us? How do you reach out? That's what we want. We want to get more. We want to hear the feedback from our customers rather than coming up with things to satisfy them. The only good way of testing customer satisfaction that I've seen in transit is through a statistically significant customer satisfaction survey.
Well, okay. I'm not going to dispute that at this particular point because my point of reference is slightly different from that. I think an analysis of the types of complaints, individual complaints, you know, the bus was late today. You know, it ticked me off and I had to stand outside for 5 minutes. That's an individual complaint, I get that. But have we had an opportunity to look through the reams of complaints that we've received and look for commonalities of complaints? And have we addressed those commonalities of complaints?
Yes, and in the included report, we do have some metrics on that. And really the two largest that we've seen with the implementation of CityLink are in two categories. The one category is an increase in walking distance that a person has to get to a bus, right? That is generally the most common one. The second one is connectivity issues where they're waiting outside or they've missed a transfer. Those are the two most common, far and away the most popular complaints that we've seen from that. There's only a certain world of complaints that we can get in transit, and if we separate all of the other ones, that's the most common.
Sorry, we were just drafting a motion. I apologize if we were not looking like we were paying attention there for just a moment. You probably saw Mr. Westerson moving around talking to various members of the administration during that time. And if people are in agreement with what I said earlier, I would be recommending a postponement to the February 3rd Civic Works. As this to come back as a submission at that time, it would make you represent. But just to give the public a little more time to delve into this if they choose to, not because this was not advertised and not done according to our procedures, but Christmas fell in the middle of this and the public probably was not as interested in Civic Works as we were during Christmas break. And so they just may not have been aware of this is happening. So that is the motion I would suggest that we bring forward when people are finished asking questions, et cetera, if you are finished asking questions. I'm seeing nods. Would that be Councillor Parker?
I want to thank Mr. Sanderson for coming forward. Is this all because of the resolution that we passed in November 15th, my resolution in regard, is that why you are here today?
Councillor Parker, two birds with one stone, yes, but also, again, that it is a 6-month pilot project that was set to end in March, and in order for us to end it in March, and we have to hire staff and do a number of different things, it gave us enough time in order to do that.
So I'm just going to reread the resolution, and I want to make sure this is what we accomplished today, okay? Whereas some transit users have stated loud and clear the disappointment in the changes made to the transit system, and whereas the changes caused some accessibility issues to numerous stops in the city, and whereas timelines for some users to arrive to destinations has drastically increased, and whereas the overall impact of the most recent changes to transit have been negative and positive, has had negative and positive outcomes. Therefore, resolve the City Council requests City Manager to provide a report to City Council on the impact of the most recent changes to the transit system. So this meeting today has got this kind of like checked off the box.
I would put forth that the attached report does cover that.
And what your resolution, Madam Chair, would be saying that we're going to follow up this even more in 1 month with getting more input and feedback from users.
The motion brought before us, the recommended motion had two parts. One was the information. We can't give that back. We got the information. That's great. The second part was recommending onto council this becomes permanent. It's that recommendation that I think we could refer to the next Civic Works to allow more time for the public to contact us if they choose. We may get nobody else coming forward, but with Christmas right in the middle of this agenda coming out, I don't think the public is aware that this meeting is occurring today.
And so the report that you brought forward could be as it stands, or it could be a change to one of the options, or it could be a third option added on. You never know, based on the feedback we get. Am I correct?
We
Perfect.
could separate the
Yeah.
motion. We can send the report on to council, and that would address the motion you brought forward. And then the decision about whether to recommend it to permanency, we could put on to the February 3rd agenda.
Thank you very much.
Having said that very quickly, does that, Mr. Westerson, is that something you can type up?
Give us about 2 minutes here. Thank you.
All right. We'll go to the Director of Community Services as you're typing that. Mr. Fox, this time it's you.
Through the chair, I think also it would be good for us to keep monitoring the metrics and monitoring the complaints and bring back a full document to be a supplemental to allow for council to have all the information that we've gathered in this time in the month leading up to it.
So we'll leave it open then to administration in February. If you need to do a presentation again because you get completely new information, or if you don't, if you want to make a submission, you suggest to the Civic Works which it's going to be. So we won't determine if it's going to be a presentation or submission. We'll leave that up to admin, but we'll bring it back to February 3rd, if that's the motion. Councillor Parker, the movement?
Well, yeah, while the motion's being typed up, just a question here. So I brought the suggestion forward that we put like kind of a little banner of something on the buses to, this is what we're doing, this is bring your feedback and all that. Obviously, we may have lost users in the meantime that may have used the bus before that would not see this message. So how are we going to?
Why Mr. Cool is here. Communication.
Yeah, Mr. Cool. So obviously the people who may have left the transit because it doesn't fit within what they used to like, I guess you'll find strategic ways to reaching out to those folks or a way of letting people know input is needed.
Yeah, I think there's sorry, go
Chair,
ahead, Lisa.
and pardon me, Mr. Cool, I would just suggest that there's a coordination effort that we can support with 311, and I would like to recommend that we direct all queries to 311. And I've been in contact with the 311 call center, and I think we're positioning to be able to handle those calls, track them, and provide good information to council in the subsequent SPC. So if it's agreeable to members of SPC, I would suggest that probably 311 is an appropriate vehicle to allow to Councillor Parker's question that not only current users as well as perhaps previous users or future users have an opportunity to weigh in with feedback, and it's aggregated in a streamlined fashion.
Thank you for that, Ms. Trent. So you can never over communicate, right? So I'm thinking, for example, a lot of the people that read the local paper like to voice their opinions and the roast and toast and all that. So if we could use that venue, possibly, I'm just throwing a suggestion. Hey, council's looking at this. Get your voice heard, because those are the people that that have complained to me are usually Herald readers. So any venue, Ms. Trent, I think that's an amazing idea. But once again, I'll leave it to be an expert, listening to the experts, and hopefully those are the kind of ideas that you could use. Thank you.
Yes, we'll absolutely coordinate internally and refer back with SPC and council.
Okay.
Thank you.
My last question, though, as we're doing this, Mr. Brierley, I don't know what you're planning for the February agenda already. Will this overwhelm that agenda if we throw another thing on there?
Madam Chair, no, this won't be an issue.
Perfect. We're not going to lose anything else on that agenda. All right, so it looks like we have a draft of the motion coming up. Be it resolved that Civic Works Standing Policy Committee recommend that City Council receive the City Links report and information. Sorry, it's a little bit small for me. Thank you. Old eyes. Receive the network redesign results report and presentation as information. So that's what we'd be sending on to the next level of City Council. And then further be it resolved that Civic Works Standing Policy Committee postpone the approval of the City Link network redesign results to February 3rd, 2022 Civic Works Standing Policy Committee meeting. I think we have be postponed in there twice, but that's okay. I think we understand the meaning of that. So that is the motion. The report will go on to council onto the next consent agenda, but we will also look at this again on February 3rd. And I know Mr. Westerson would like this to be an actual motion and not a consensus, so would anybody be willing to move that? Councillor Parker, any further debate or discussion on the motion? Councillor Middleton Hope.
Just a clarification point. It doesn't say anything in terms of the reason why we're asking for the delay. We're asking for the delay for additional input from the public. So as a friendly amendment, could we add a portion of that as well? Because I think if we look back on this in 10 years from now, will we know what the motion was about?
So right after the Standing Public Policy Committee meeting to gather more public input.
Maybe to address your issue, maybe we can not have it in the consent, have it outside the consent, So I can speak to the reason why we're doing what we're doing at the council meeting. So it gives, quite often when we do a consent, it's kind of all, everything's in a big bundle. But if it's a separate motion or a separate item in the agenda, I could give,
The second motion won't be going on to council, that's just for us. The first one is the report, and you can talk to that during, yeah.
yeah, I'll speak
But
to the
not the
report.
postponement won't go on to
And I'll
council.
explain the postponement for community, more community feedback and all that. So instead of it being all in one and just, we all vote as one, it'd be something I could speak to separately. So we could all speak to it.
Well, because I will do that as deputy mayor anyway.
Okay, thank you.
We'll handle
Yeah.
that way. So it's in there. So friendly amendment, we just want to add after the last meeting to get more public response or to get more public feedback. All right. Councillor Parker, it's your motion. Are you okay with the friendly amendment?
Yeah, I'm fine with the friendly amendment, so we debate these, please.
That's the logic of it?
We can debate these.
Oh, sure, I will. I'll just introduce it, and usually we don't have too much debate on this, but I want to give some logic and context behind this. This was a big issue, and I think Mr. Sanderson heard that loud and clear, as well as members of council and members of the administration. And I think that if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. And most of the questions around the table in regards to the community input and feedback, both positive and negative, and Ms. McKenna made a really good point in regards to the process. So this will allow us to have that venue to become more familiarized from the users, what they've been saying, what we've been hearing, and hopefully more community feedback is better. And from what I heard from Mr. Cool and Ms. Trent, we can find new ways of letting them know what's happening and getting their voice heard. So I think that's a good idea, and that's why this motion is being brought forward.
We will vote. I'm sorry, I keep looking at Councillor Schmidt-Rempel, but she can't vote on this anyways. All right, all in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Sanderson.
Thank you again, Mr. Sanderson, for the presentation, for all the information. Thank you, Ms. McKenna, for joining us at SPC. We move now to submissions, of which we have none. And that moves us then to adjournment, and we are adjourned. And I will see you all back here February 3rd. Enjoy the cold for the next few days.
That's my son's birthday,